Good morning. I would like to welcome you to a meeting of the Port Angeles Business Association. This is another one in our series of electoral forums that we are bringing to you and the voters of Clallam County. And I would like to turn the program over to Andrew May, who is our moderator this morning. Andrew?
Thank you, President Kai. Ladies and gentlemen, members and guests, fellow participants, good morning, and welcome to another beautiful day in Port Angeles as our political forum continues. Clallam County is one of our few counties in the state that is a charter review, meaning that we, the citizens, can actually have limited ability to change or to dictate how our county is run. With that said, this year the Charter Review has approved 6 different ballot initiatives that you, the citizens, will vote on. Today we are going to deal with 3 of these issues: housekeeping, prosecuting attorney, and how we elect county commissioners. We have our 2 participants today, both long-term county review commissioners. First, from the city of Forks, city attorney, city planner, Rod Fleck, who made this trip all the way early this morning. Rod, welcome. And we have the co-chair of the Charter Review Commission, Norma Turner. Norma, welcome. We'll get to the back and we'll have you participants socially distance up here.
Andrew, could you and Kai lead us in the pledge?
Oh, sure, please.
Thank you, Edna, for that reminder. Please stand and join us in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, yep, we'll get Norma mic'd up. And then once again, we have worked with the health department. We have the social distancing. If you want to keep your mask on, you can. In the past, we have had some folks who've had some visual aspects, and they can hear or see you better if your mask is off. Okay. But with that said, it's totally up to you. And Rod, would you care to tell the public about the housekeeping measure?
Well, and this will be a good sound check to see if whether I should do this with or without the mask. Though I've always joked with my children that they could hear me, you know, everybody else in Beaver could hear me from Forks, but my kids apparently couldn't in the same house. So the one of the amendments that came forward from the Charter Review Commission, and the Charter Review Commission consists of 15 members elected, 5 from each district. And one of those suggestions came from a citizen who noted that the way the wording was in some sections of the charter, the word county commissioner and county could be added in places to make the document a little easier to read and a little clearer as to who was being talked about. Part of that might be because of the term commissioner is also used by other jurisdictions, and so a new person not familiar with the document might be confused, you know, is this the county or is this the port or is this the hospital commissioner, et cetera. A few of us thought it was an editing change that was not a substantive change. Therefore, go ahead, let's put it forward to the voters and see if it's a housekeeping one that they would like to see in their charter. Because ultimately, this is really the voters' charter and for the whole county. And so that was, I think, how that one came forward. It was pretty non-controversial, I think, when we
absolutely non-controversial.
When we all got to like, okay, sure, why not? So that was probably the easier one, Andrew.
Yes, and if I remember correctly, like you said, that passed 15. That was unanimous from the commission. Yeah. Again, nothing controversial on this one. I see no questions coming in. I have none. Just straightforward, easier to understand. Anything else to add, Norma?
No. We were fortunate to have Elizabeth Stanley as our legal representative, and she's the one who came up with it. We're very respectful of her opinion.
So we'll move. So we'll move on, but once again, we just wanted to inform the public of that one. Now, the next one that we had some discussion on was about the prosecuting attorney. And this is to send to the public the option of making the prosecuting attorney a nonpartisan. Norma, would you care to start by telling us a little of this?
Yeah, interesting enough, this issue goes back to 2015. When the charter review met in 2015, we, as the charter, asked the prosecuting attorney, would he look into, could we make that office nonpartisan? And unfortunately, the opinion didn't come back until August, and we had to have the issues on the ballot at the beginning of August, so it wasn't addressed. So this charter review commission, that's the first thing we went ahead and asked was, can it be nonpartisan? And the ruling was, yes, we can make that change. So that was pretty non-controversial too. So it's on the ballot. Basically, the folks who wrote the arguments in favor of that couldn't come today, and I told them somewhere in this paperwork I would tell you what they had to say, but basically it's just that the concept that justice should be blind, and so it doesn't matter what party you're affiliated. When you're elected as prosecutor, your job is to implement the law equally amongst all the citizens. So that was the message that nonpartisanship should give. We had no input from either of the political parties. We had very little input actually from the public on that, except that in the survey they overwhelmingly agreed it was a good idea.
And Rod, especially as a city attorney, I know that you were there when we heard some limited opposition from our fellow commissioners. Would you care to maybe recap what the concern was?
I think one of the challenges when you're electing individuals is you are trying to identify and understand their thought processes, where they come from, and their backgrounds. And so in American politics, a partisan moniker is a way that people can start sorting through some of those questions. And that's why I think that has been a partisan position in this county. I think that's why it's been upheld that way. I agree that justice should be blind, and justice is usually just administered by a court. The prosecutor plays a different role in that process. And so I can understand where some people are like, well, maybe this should be partisan. I also understand the argument that it really is, it is not necessarily a guiding principle as to what someone's political affiliation is as to how they would run their prosecutorial office. I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. Rarely do I hear politics be involved when it comes to a prosecutor's decision on whether to charge or not to charge, or how a case will be handled. So at least that's been my experience in the county. So.
Right, and we'd also remind you that our chief attorney general in the state of Washington is a partisan position. So.
Yeah.
Well, on this, Norma, and I'll start with you. We have a question in from a member and former county commissioner, Jim McIntyre, and he asked, how will making the prosecutor nonpartisan improve county government or better inform voters when people stand for election as prosecuting attorney?
Well, I would answer that going way back in the charter. If you recall, when it first started, our auditor, treasurer, all those folks used to be partisan. And those were changed to nonpartisan. And the philosophy at that time was, if you have someone running for office and it's nonpartisan, then you need to look at their qualifications. If it's partisan, then you really need to just look at what party you usually vote for. And is it party A or party B? And then you can put your vote out based on party affiliation rather than whether or not the candidate, what their qualifications are. So nonpartisanship really pushes you to evaluate the candidate as to what they say, what they've done, what their background is. That's the biggest argument on nonpartisanship.
And Rod, as a good attorney at the opposite side, any reasons why you could see this would not improve government?
I don't think the moniker on someone's ballot title improves or worsens government. I think it's a matter of what information are we trying to make sure is out there with the voters, and what can we give the voters the broadest understanding or starting point when someone's running for elected office. And so, I mean, as Norma pointed out, the Attorney General's office, for example, is a partisan office in the state of Washington. And so some would come to compare the prosecutor to that type of role. At the same time, we have a lot of very talented elected people that are run on a nonpartisan basis that do everything from handling our elections to handling our taxes. And so I can also understand that argument and position as well. It's nice to know that McIntyre's up and not sleeping in this morning. So,
Anything else to add from the two of you?
No, I think, Ron and I would both encourage a yes vote on this one.
So now we'll move over to the one that I think So now we'll move over to the issue that I think we'll truly have some discussion on. As we saw in the Charter Review Commission ourselves, this took up a lot of time. It wasn't an overall clear consensus, although it was passed on to the voters. And that is the issue of changing the way we elect the county commissioners. The proposal is to, in essence, go back to the way it used to be, where the district itself would be the only ones voting in the primary, and then those winners would go on to the general election, changing it from the way it is currently, where both the primary and the general are held by only those in the district. Norma, I believe you were the one that actually sponsored and this referendum. Would you care to please take some time to explain to us what is the purpose of this referendum?
I'd be happy to, thank you. And thanks for inviting us here today. This is a unique experience. If it gets too hot, I'm gonna take my mask down. So is the sound okay with my mask on? Okay. So as you just explained, the intent of this change is to return us to nominating our county commissioners at the district, voting at large, in other words, countywide for the general election, which is the way that we have elected our county commissioners throughout the history of the county, except for the last 5 years. And that was in 2015 when a change was made. So I want to start off by giving you a brief historical perspective. I'm going to turn this down because it drives me nuts. Okay. So the manner in which county commissioners have been elected, for the 1983, there was an amendment on the ballot saying, let's elect commissioners by district only. The voters said no. Then again in 2003, they put it on the ballot again. This time again, the voters said no. And then in 2015, some members of the charter decided they'd put it on the ballot for a third time. So the argument of the proponents of putting this on the ballot in 2015 was that, well, let's give the voters a chance to try it again. But what's fascinating to me is those same folks today, now when we want to say to the voters, you've tried this, you can evaluate it in the last 15 years. Let's evaluate and see if it really worked, or should we go back to how it was? They now tell us in their statement in the voters' ban that, quote, we are telling the voters they got it wrong and the voters didn't know what they're voting for. That is not what we're telling them. We are saying, let's evaluate this change. And interesting enough, I didn't hear any of those arguments from the proponents of this keeping it like it is back in 2015 when they were putting something on the ballot for the third time. They never worried about, did the voters get it wrong the first 2 times? So I think that's, and you look at your voters pamphlet, I think that argument, it doesn't hold up for me. So anyway, the one thing the history has done for me is, even though when I was on that chart I voted no for it, I do now appreciate that they set a precedent that you can indeed put things on the ballot that have already been voted on. So that's what we're doing. We're giving the voters a chance to say, how has this worked out? So how has it worked out? Well, Since the adoption of district-only voting, we now have a Board of Commissioners that have been elected by a minority vote in all of their districts. Commissioner District 2 was elected in 2016 with only 16% of the total votes cast in that election. Commissioner in District 3 in 2018 received 13% of the total votes, and District 1 in 2019 had 24% of the total votes. Everyone else who is elected and serves the county in the county courthouse, they are elected countywide. In fact, interesting enough, our other countywide commissioners are port commissioners, and they are elected countywide. So I don't quite understand why we should make the commissioners this own special entity. In fact, I find it's difficult that you have county commissioners who are going to be working with their peers that have garnered between 56 and 68% of the vote, and they've only had 13 or 16%. It hardly looks like their peers. So more importantly is the fallacy that was quoted on. Well, we vote for state and federal people by district, so we should do the same thing for county commissioners. We have to remember that in our state, our representatives are one of a body of 98. Our federal is one of a body of 435. So their singular vote very, very, very seldom would ever change the outcome of what's going on. But when you have one of three, what can happen is you can have two commissioners. I'm not going to do District 1 to 3. I'm going to make up letters so we don't feel like we're picking on anybody. But if you have a district commissioner from District A and District B and District C, A and B can say, oh, let's put X in District C. Even if the people in District C don't want that to happen in their district, they can vote to put it there and never have to answer at the ballot box. I think when you make a decision at the county level, you should have to answer at the ballot box. I think it's just basic democracy. I'm gonna I have more, but I'm not going to take too much time, so I can stop if you want and then come back. Well, I don't know what time.
And that sounds good. Let's, I know Rod has some passionate feelings about this. He drove all the way here early in the morning. We'll go to Rod for a bit, and then we'll come back for a rebuttal before we go into questions. Rod, tell us about changing the way we elect our commissioners.
Well, I have to acknowledge the persistence of the proponents. In the charter review, in COVID charter review territory, we have not had a lot of public input and a lot of public effort. And one of the things that the main body of proponents added that we should do a survey. A few of us were concerned because getting information out in COVID was challenging. We didn't have a newspaper for 6 to 8 weeks on the West End. That was the Forks Forum. We had the Peninsula Daily News, but its numbers are relatively low. And so they put out a survey, and in that survey, more than 50% said they like electing people by district. And you notice that wasn't used. And in 2015, 63% of the voters in the county said, let's elect by district. But I mean, I think a group was trying to say you got it wrong, voters. And you didn't really understand the ramifications, the implications, and the impacts when you voted for this. I disagree. You didn't want to be at the forefront of fair, healthy, and empowering elections. My colleagues and I disagree. And now it's, well, let's evaluate the change. And let's talk about how the numbers countywide are really minorities. I'm going to come back to that because if we're evaluating the change, what's the problem that's trying to be solved by this proposal? I think I know what it is. They've couched it really well, but I'm going to be pretty candid about it when I come back to that. I use the terms fair, healthy, and empowering because in 2018, in recognition of the National Voter Rights Act, Washington passed a Voter Rights Act that encouraged and authorized local governments to elect people by district in order to let the governments reflect the distinct communities of the regions in which they're governing. Why? Well, it's a way to ensure that all voices are heard, all voices are represented, and all voices have a fair chance, and this is the key, a fair chance to get elected to represent their communities. I would argue for evaluating the change, what it's done, it's actually encouraged a little bit more collaboration, I would say, watching the Board of Commissioners, and cooperation. And it's also ended an attitude that, well, if Port Angeles wants this, then that's the way the county should go. I think that's the evaluation that's gone on, and that's why you have this proposal. You suddenly need to have a candidate that can win their district in the primary and in the general. That's a new model for some, and it's a challenging model for some. Under the old system, you were nominated by district, and then you ran county-wide. I didn't hear any numbers about how many votes the person's got in each district when they're in their primaries in comparison to what they got county-wide. And the reason is because in those elections, PA West, not the city of Port Angeles, the Port Angeles region, PA Central, which was its own district, and PA East pretty much decided who was going to be the county commissioner. The nomination in the district was kind of perfunctory in some situations, and in some elections it was, at least in my 25 years here. So I think that if you want to look at that, take a look. Now it's interesting, one of the people who's no longer with us was Ted Miller. And one of the last documents Ted sent in to Charter Review, he was a commissioner at the time, noted, I'm going to have to take these off, so this is going to get real interesting, I apologize, is that Clallam County is sufficiently diverse that each district has a unique character that justifies election by district. You wouldn't elect the state legislature at large, would you? And although Port Angeles has traditionally benefited by dominating the previous at-large system, Port Angeles voters are just as fair-minded as everyone else. Every single precinct in the city of Port Angeles supported the change when it was on the ballot after the 2015 Charter Review Commission. If we're evaluating a proposal as to whether or not it worked or not, one of the things in the evaluation is what didn't work. I haven't heard that other than, and this is where I'm going to be extremely candid, a group of folks couldn't get their people elected out west, and that's what they want to change.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about
Yes,
that.
Norma. Away we go. Norma,
okay.
please, what do you respond to that?
Rod has put that in the voters pamphlet, that this is a group of folks who didn't get their way. I have no idea. Talk about data. I'd like to have the data about that. So I don't know what that means. It's a made-up story. So a couple things. I've heard a lot of ranting about how Port Angeles runs the world. Port Angeles, from Valley Street west, that's District 3. So part of Port Angeles is District 3. And then you go east. And if you look at the 3 districts in 2020, in the census, the line is going to move significantly east because the largest voting block is in Sequim. It is not, the largest voting block is not in Port Angeles. And interesting enough, Mark Ozias, the county commissioner from District 1, came to us and said, I think we should return to countywide voting. One of the reasons is that there's a lot of comments about the uniqueness of districts. And I want to address that. Districts are not static things. They change after every census. We built our house in 1973. We lived in District 3, and then we lived in District 2, because prior to the charter change in 1989, we had our own type of Clallam County gerrymandering. They wanted to keep Port Angeles, so maybe, Roger, going back to old history, they want to keep Port Angeles as a unique entity. So the west line came to Port Angeles, and when it hit the city line, It scooped around the backside, the south side, and went all the way to McDonald's Creek. So in 1989 in the charter, we said that's crazy. And so we mandated north-south district boundaries. So the argument that each commissioner deserves its own unique commissioner, they can have it because they do the nominating. So nobody gets to be on the at-large ballot unless the district folks have elected them. So that's how they get their own commissioner. The other thing, when you talk about what we heard from folks, excuse me, let me get this, is that this whole idea that you have your own commissioner. I didn't think we owned commissioners, but anyway, thank you. It used to be when the commissioners were elected at large, you could go in and talk to the commissioner of your choice, and they had to listen to you because you were their constituent. Now that you have your own commissioner, you've gone from having 3 commissioners to having only 1. You can't, if you go talk to the other 2, they don't have to listen to you because you're never gonna have to vote for them. They're never gonna have to seek your vote. So we have lost power. So you want to know about numbers. I have them here, Rod. Interesting enough on this election, for example, in 2019, when the county commissioner was elected with 6,700 votes, a Port District 3 commissioner lost that election, but had 8,300 votes. In 2018, the commissioner gained 5,200 votes. There were other county races that people lost, and they had between 10,000 and 18,000 votes. So it just makes no sense to me why you should have people be able to, and the other thing that happens about this uniqueness is that it used to be the county commissioner, when you were running, you had to go to all 3 districts. And as Mark Ozias said, now that it's district only, he didn't have to go out to the Forks Chamber of Commerce. I mean, so the commissioner gets to stay in their little bubble of their own district. They don't have to go to they don't have to come to PABA, that's in Port Angeles. So they don't have to go and find out what is this uniqueness that we're talking about in each district. So when they're elected, their only frame of reference is their own district, but they're making decisions countywide. So my argument is that when you have people that are elected with the minority of the vote, then they go and make decisions for 100% of us that feels undemocratic. And I know that Rod loves to talk about the Washington State Voters' Rights Act. And he told us, well, threatened is one word, but I won't go there, but basically told us at the charter that if we went back to countywide voting, that somebody could file a lawsuit. Well, I have several things to say about that. One, the Washington State Voters' Rights Act did not change state law on how county commissioners are elected in all non-charter counties. They are nominated by district and elected at large. The Washington State Voters' Rights Act is very specific. It's about do not disenfranchise a very specific group. And that is, I gotta get my glasses on, quote, groups that represent race, color, or language minority. In Clallam County, we are 87% white. Our minorities spread countywide range from 0.2 up to 6.6. The only place in Clallam County that has a significant minority population that would fall under the Washington State Voter Rights Act is in Forks. The city of Forks has, if you go online, somewhere between 19 and 24% Latinos. But you know what? The Forks City Council votes at large. So I understand why the Voter Rights Act doesn't impact the Forks City Council elections. That's where it should impact. Turns countywide, it does not impact. So the Washington Voters' Rights Act does not really apply to this change. Thank you. I have other things, but I'll switch back so we don't occupy too much time.
Well, Rod, I think you probably have a few things to unpack here. Is it a made-up story? What is the uniqueness of our districts, if any? How many commissioners do I really have here in Port Angeles under the current system? And give us some more about the state law.
What I always find interesting is but you're not doing something, Ron Richards. Oh, I'm sorry, Norma. And that the argument is Forks isn't doing something. One of the issues when you try to look at doing things by district is, do you have an accurate count? The Voter Rights Act came out in 2018, took effect, I believe, in 2019. We have a census underway right now. And then that's when you would look at the issue of how you would do districting. It's something that's been mentioned. We haven't, we've been a little focused on a few other things with COVID, but it is something that we, are cognizant of. It's probably one of the reasons why I'm familiar with that. And I'd like to kind of work back up to the very top, is that we get the proponent's argument that you get to nominate by district. See, you get to make your choice. You get to nominate by district, but you don't get to decide who your commissioner is going to be any more than anyone else in the rest of the county. And what's interesting is in the data is that we got presented, we don't see how some commissioners did in the primaries in their district. I seem to remember a few commissioners, when they were in their nomination, had fewer votes than the person who won the primary, if you're going by numbers. But let's talk instead about comparing the commissioners to a county-wide election and who won or lost at county-wide. That's not what this proposal is. The proposal is to, as we got told by, very well by former and now deceased Commissioner Ted Miller, is to let the districts reflect that unique character, that unique attribute and difference that we see throughout the county. I really don't get this, that I only have one county commissioner. I've never had Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Ozias, Commissioner McIntyre tell me, Rod, you need to go talk to the commissioner from District 3. It just doesn't happen. And I've had meetings at the state legislature, for example, with representatives all over the state of Washington. So this concept of a territorial door check or a territorial lock that you have to have a certain key, I guess in the West End that'd be made out of wood, and in the East End it'd probably be made out of carrots or some farm instrument, to open up that commissioner's door to go talk to them, to me seems a little hyperbole. So I don't get that. That's not been the experience I've had. It's not been the experience others I know who have talked to county commissioners have had. And there is a petition process, and I pointed out that petition process of the charter. I said, yes, I or anybody else, could fill this petition process out and initiate this process. Be cognizant of that. That's actually one of the trainings a group of attorneys had at an attorney conference. And one of the proponents of the statute said, you all need to be aware this process is pretty simple, straightforward. Can you make an argument that a district should have its own process because of the race, color, language, and minority representation? But in other discussions, the way it's worded, you can add to that as well. And I think what concerns some folks is that there was this other process that was out there. And the voters in Clallam County in 2015 already adopted it. Fair, equitable, ensuring that you had the ability to be represented by people that you knew, people you worked with, people in your community, to represent your community at the county. And the idea that two of the commissioners would suddenly vote to put something in one district or the other, well, I'm not sure. The commissioners don't have control over land use settling. So I'm not sure what they're voting to put in somebody's district that would be so offensive. I'm a little confused on the hidden scare in that example. So I think I got all your questions answered, Andrew.
Anything to add, Norma, before we go on to a question?
A couple things. I don't know what Rod's talking about, this other process, because the Washington State Voters Act is very precise in its language. And I know when we were discussing this at the charter, he insinuated that we could, if some group such as shared a demographic such as age, they could file a suit. That's not in the Washington State Voters Right. And if there's another process, then it needs to be codified. So I'm just going by what is currently in the Washington State Voters Right Act. A couple other quick points is that I don't hear these concerns about the fact we elect port commissioners and PUD commissioners countywide. So again, I'm not sure why it is so onerous that we want to have countywide county commissioners, but it's perfectly okay to have port commissioners and PUD. Now, PUD is a little bit different because they do segment out for Port Angeles because they have their own utility district. So that's not truly a countywide, but it does encompass 3 and 1 and portions of 2. So basically, Port and PUD are both countywide. The other thing is that we are talking about, this is a county of 70,000 people. We're very small. This dividing up into districts at the state, under the RCW about county commissioner elections, they do not trigger district voting until you get to a population of 300,000. And by that, you have to have the public vote on that. It's mandated when it gets to 400,000. I think that's quite different, talking about a 400,000 population base rather than 70,000. I think that we are micromanaging 70,000. And the idea about what am I talking about, there was some real concerns about that thing in Squim, the bed and breakfast with the 18 or 28 or whatever. There was some real controversy about that, and some of the commissioners that didn't live in Squim thought maybe it was okay, but the people in Squim didn't think it was okay. And then it sort of all blew up for its own reasons. And I, as a public health nurse, are into prevention. I'm not saying that these things have happened, but I'm saying that they have the potential of happening. And in public health, you work on prevention. You make sure that you cover your bases and that you do what needs to be done. So I believe going back to countywide is a prevention measure. So every commissioner feels a responsibility for every voter. Thank you.
And Rod, do you want to talk a little bit about this population argument?
I always find it interesting. One, I mean, we're the charter review for Clallam County. We're not the charter review for the PUD or for the port. I think those governments are probably going to have to look at some of these same questions as they go forward in the next decade. I think all governments are going to have to after the 2018 statutory discussions. And the other thing about being a charter county is we can be unique. And that's always proposed. Hey, you know, we're a charter county, that lets us be unique. And the minute we become unique, it's like we shouldn't do that. You know, well, we're not a big county, so we don't have to have districts. And because we're not one of those that should, you know, we're only 77,000 people. And so we're micromanaging this. I don't see that. I think that's kind of a red herring argument. The idea of electing by district, that 63% of the voters in 2015 voted for. All the precincts in Port Angeles voted for, is that it allows the commissioners to reflect the regions of the county and not be commonized by the largest voting group of precincts in the county. There's nothing that's gone wrong in the last 5 years, other than some folks not been able to get their candidates elected.
There you go again. I have no idea where your documentation is for that. It's a made-up story. Thank you very much.
How's Ron?
I have no idea.
Well, then let's go to a question that isn't made up, comes in from, again, former county commissioner Jim McIntyre. And he's really drilling down on a specific issue here. Jim asked that the critical difference in the job characteristics of commissioner versus other county elected officials is that county commissioners are legislators as well as administrators. Other elected officials are solely of the executive branch. Now, he's asking, given this distinction, that commissioners are both legislative and administrative, why not elect commissioners by district as state legislators are? So again, the question really is the unique role of commissioners versus other county electives make it more practical or better government to elect by district? Let's start with Norma.
Well, as I said earlier, I think that's a false equivalent. Because when you have 1 of 3 versus 1 of 98 or 1 of 435, it's a very different equation. It's a very different power of the one vote. And I think the fact that they're legislators and administrators and all the other things, I still believe that they need to be responsive to everybody who lives in Clallam County. And as a commissioner, every decision they make, they need to weigh how it affects all 3 districts. And they can only do that when they have gone to the voters of all 3 districts and asked them and earned their vote.
Rod, anything,
Well,
and again, you have the essence of the question. Is it the uniqueness of their role?
Interesting, because at a state level, we have a legislature that's elected by district. It used to be elected by county, interesting enough, early in our history, and then we went to clarifying that we need to do districts by 1 person, 1 vote. And we have, though, a set of positions: the Attorney General, the Lands Commissioner, the Auditor, the Secretary of State, and the Insurance Commissioner are the ones that jump at my mind, that are elected statewide because they're dealing with the administration of certain aspects. Insurance and how it's bought, sold, and registered in the state of Washington. Secretary of State, how you deal with corporations and filing of documents to create legal entities. And they have parallels in our county courthouse, right? I mean, we have positions where there's an administrative function that we are wanting to see kept the same across the county. The way taxes are done, the way assessing of valuations are done, not the values, but the assessing of the valuations are done. And then we have the commissioners who act in more of a legislative function. They do have administrative functions. And that was an interesting discussion that we were expecting this charter to talk about, was the commissioners and the county administrator and that executive and legislative function. But right now that is staying the same. And I think that election by district is a reflection of that idea that you've got a legislative function and you want to bring in the legislative aspects and how is this going to work here, and create a series of compromises to address legislation for the county as a whole, and those functions that are more in the purview for administration by the commissioners. That's the way I think there are parallels. I don't think it's a loss, I don't think it's a false comparison. I think we have a government from the lowest level to the highest level that's arranged in a certain pattern. And I think this is been an effort to reflect that pattern.
Norma, anything else to add?
Nope.
No, okay. So the next question, and we've been talking about this again, does being elected by district only make that commissioner more, less, or no difference with the way they would actually go out and meet or interact with those Clallam County citizens outside their district. So do each of you believe that it either would or would not impact how they would move around the entire county, how they would be open to citizens? Let's start with Rod.
Well, I haven't seen it, as I said. I mean, I just haven't seen it. Now, I'm not a wallflower, so maybe that's part of it. I also don't look for the special hidden symbol or key to open a door to someone's office. You know, I mean, you call, you make an appointment, or you call them and say, hey, this is the issue I'm dealing with. I thought I'd call you. In our county, you can't really talk to all the commissioners at once unless you do it in a public meeting. Usually you have a very limited public comment period, and as an attorney, I can talk really fast. I can get a lot of words in less than 3 minutes. But if I'm trying to have a meaningful conversation, I might have to make those interactions, and I've done that for the last 5 years. So I don't see that as the barrier that others are saying that exists. I also think that the county commissioners, when you have something of a person, we have 3, you need 2 to make a decision. And if it's really important, if you can get all 3, that looks really, really good. And a politician that's elected into a legislative role has to find a way to create that collaboration, that coalition that goes beyond the 4 corners of their district. I mean, that's the nature of our democracies. It requires cooperation, compromise, collaboration, and communication. Those things still exist. I don't see the bunkered mentality that says 5 years later, we got to redo this and 63% of the voters got it wrong. I don't see that. Neither did the other opponents of the proposal. So that's how I'd answer it, Andrew.
Well,
And Norma, that is the question. It's this bunker mentality. So you believe that this will start to institutionalize if we keep the same system.
Ask me the same question you asked Rod was,
Right.
does that keep, what did you ask?
Yes, so the question is, does being elected by district only, does that improve, decrease, or keep the same how commissioners would interact and meet with Clallam County citizens outside their district? Does it bunker them down?
So there are 2 parts of that. One, certainly when they're running for election, yes, it changes. They only have to talk to the people who live in their district. As District 1 Commissioner said, he never had to go out to the Forks Chamber of Commerce, because why would you do that? You're busy running your own district. So during the election process, yes. If their time is well spent, they spend it in their district. So when they get elected with, what if they heard from their constituents? They don't know what District 2 and 3 or 1 and 3 or whoever else was. During their time in office, I can't answer that, but it'd be a question that would be interesting to ask. The chamber in Forks, how often have they seen the other commissioners? The chambers in Port Angeles, how often have they seen? The chamber in Sequim, how often have you seen? Regular business people, I mean, you just have to go around and ask, how often have you seen a commissioner other than your own come to your district? So the other thing I want to go back to is Rod keeps saying how awful it is that we want the voters to have a chance to vote again because they've already had their say. He didn't argue that in 2015. The public had already voted not once, but twice to reject electing commissioners by district. That did not stop him in 2015 putting on the ballot for the 3rd time. So somehow he didn't care what the voters had told him, not once, but twice. But this time it's some kind of terrible cabal of people who lost an election that are trying to put it back down. No, what we're saying is it was an idea. We've tried it. And as far as many people are concerned, it didn't work as well as it should have.
Before I ask you the follow-up, Rod, did you want to say anything to the accusation there?
Well, I mean, I'll say two things. One, for elections, it did change. In 2015, 63% of the voters said, we want to change on the way we're doing elections. But here's the thing, electing isn't legislating. Electing isn't governing. Winning might be easy. Governing is hard, is the line in Hamilton. And that's the thing. You then have to govern. You then have to work with your colleagues to get things done. And many of the decisions made by the county commissioners of late have been 3-0 decisions in that last 5 years. So I think instead of focusing on what went wrong, you know, let's look at that. And as to this, the voters who spoke in 1990. If you look at the census results in the 2010 census, a large number of the population in Clallam County had only lived in Clallam County for less than 10 years. I fall on that. I've been here for 25 years, but I was here in 1990. I had hair. Honestly, I had hair. I mean, Kitchell won't believe it, and some of my friends in Forks won't believe it, but I had hair, and I was going to school. The world might have changed a little bit since 1990. And so it was back on the ballot in 2003, 13 years later. And voters said no. 12 years later, it was back on. And the voters said yes. 5 years later, now it's like, well, we've evaluated and this isn't working. But have you heard what's not working? What has not worked in 5 years from the proponents? I haven't heard it. They didn't hear it in the charter. I haven't heard it here sitting this morning.
Then let me follow up on a point that Norma made, because I think that's interesting and on its face value seems relevant. If a person is running first time for county commissioner, they get elected. Under the system now, they're only campaigning in their district. By not going countywide, do you think that there would be a disadvantage of that candidate not knowing fully the issues of the whole county that they'll be voting on as opposed to the district?
No, I'm sorry. And maybe it's because my position in government, maybe it's because I kind of do some teaching about what government, what my maybe ideal government is that a legislative person goes out and does their homework. And Mark Ozias has been out in Forks for meeting, dealing with the Chamber of Commerce and the Tourism Board. Randy Johnson has been out there for issues involving everything from water quality to, just what's going on with economic development. Now, this is all pre-COVID, so the world in COVID of 2020 has made life different and difficult for all of us. And I also say that when you're running probably for office, groups reach out to you that are countywide groups and say, hey, we're going to have a forum. Could you come in and be a part of this? Or would you be like to, even though it's not your district, would you like to come out and be part of that? And at least say, this is why you're running. I think that's up to the candidate how they want to do that. But once they get elected, the candidate's going to have to be familiar with the Dungeness River system. They're going to have to be familiar with how things are done down on the waterfront in Port Angeles or up on the Upper Hills section. That's South Clallam County, which is actually up on the hills, or out on the West End. To be an effective legislator, you have to go and do your homework. I think our commissioners have been doing that for 5 years.
Now, here comes an interesting question from a member. They're wondering if we have any information about conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican voters per district.
Do we know, does anybody of you know the general
makeup of the districts outside of anecdotal?
Well, since people don't register by party, you just have to look at election results. And just assume that R's are conservative and D's are liberal. You'd have to make some assumptions.
And Rod, would you agree the same thing?
I would. I mean, you got to look at it in the way the precincts go. And then, and what's interesting in Clallam County, you may have a precinct that goes, you know, with a Republican candidate in one race, and in the next race, it goes with a Democrat and in the precinct. And you might, I mean, I used to do a lot of this work when I was in Seattle before I came to Forks. And I mean, there's times where I've looked at precincts going, what is going on here? And so I don't think you've got that ability to say, this is, you know, a conservative or liberal. I think you have a very independent streak that is very large in Clallam County. And that independence floats within political structures pretty widely in our county. I think that would be my response to that one, Andrew.
Yeah, and I think I would tend to agree. I think the question, or the gist of that question probably was, is this some attempt to balance off or equal those? But I think as we look at our county, we are definitely purple. With that said, I want to, first of all, as we get ready to go to closing, as always, thank anyone for coming up here and taking these questions, for driving in the morning. I want to remind everybody that next week, we're going to be dealing with the only referendum on the ballot, the statewide R90 referendum on reproduction education in our schools. I also want to, again, thank our two students, Jason and Tyler, for coming here and filming. And with that said, let's go to closing. And Rod, please give us your best pitch on why to defeat this.
I would say we didn't get it wrong in 2015. I would say that there's no egregious incident that can be pointed to by the proponents as to why this isn't working. I would say that we ensured in 2015 that we'd have a fair, healthy, empowering election system in Clallam County. And I would say that those in the 63% who voted to make this by district were forward thinking, got it right, and should continue to do so. That said, Norma and I debate vigorously and work together equally as vigorously. And I think that's one of the fundamentals of our democratic system that we as a charter county can relish, is the opportunity we have to have these debates and talk about at a local level how we want our county to be governed. And don't lose sight of that. Enjoy the opportunity to really have the county reflect what you think the county could be. That's what you get to do in the charter review when the proposals come up to you. Be it on this one that took up a lot of time, be it on the partisanship of the prosecutor electing by nonpartisan, or by just simply making the document read a little easier. That's a unique, powerful gift in Clallam County. Enjoy that, relish in that, and use that. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the PABA doing this to the two students. Kudos beyond belief. And for the host, thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Rod. And now, Norma, would you care to tell us why close up with why the citizens should vote to pass this?
Well, as I've told you, I believe a yes vote, because I believe when you have commissioners that make decisions for all of us, should be voted on by all of us. We're a small county, we should all have a say. But also the fact that this is a chance for people to evaluate. I mean, the 2015 was a significant change for how we've done things for eons. And we changed to a mode that is different than what the state law mandates in all other counties. They must have some good reason why they do it everywhere else. But so I would say that this is it's not wrong to put it on the ballot. I think it's perfectly correct that we're giving the voters a chance to say, we made a change in 2015. Do we really want to stick with that, or do we want to change? And if it's just wonderful, like Rod says, then it'll stay. And if people believe that they want their commissioners voted on by countywide so they can be a constituent of all three commissioners, they'll vote to approve it. So I urge a yes on this. Whichever way it goes, we'll still have a government.
We
So
will.
thank you
And
for
with
the
that now,
invitation,
we'll
and
turn it
thanks to the
over to the
students.
president, who will invite everybody back here next week. There you go, President Kai.
Oh, here you go. Let me just figure out.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning. I want to thank very much Norma and Rod for taking the time to come out and educate us on these important issues. And I want to thank all our volunteers who make possible to bring this to you and who will make possible for those of you who didn't catch the entire meeting to eventually see the recording of these electoral forums. I hope we will see you with us again next Tuesday morning. And with this, we are adjourned.